The sound of the front door slamming still rings in my ears. My son, Brandon, stood tall with his arms crossed, his voice colder than winter. "You don't belong here anymore, Mom," he said, his words sharp like knives. Behind him, my daughter, Kyla, smirked, whispering, "She's useless now." This was the house I worked 20 years to build. I scrubbed its floors, cooked its meals, and paid its bills. Yet tonight, I stood outside on the porch with nothing but a small suitcase and the sting of betrayal burning in my chest. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering. To them, I wasn't Samantha Scott, the woman who raised 2 children alone after her husband left. I was just a broken mother cast aside by her own blood. Before I tell you how I got my revenge, hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. The sky darkened, and rain soaked my clothes, but the storm inside me hurt more. They thought I had no strength left. They thought I would crawl away and disappear. But deep inside, I remembered something my late mother once told me before she passed. "One day, Samantha, you'll find what I left behind. It will protect you when no one else does." That night, her words became my only hope. I dragged my suitcase down the street, each step heavier than the last. My children's laughter echoed behind the locked door. Brandon's deep chuckle, Kyla's sharp giggle, it cut me more than the cold rain. They were celebrating my downfall, and I could hear it. I stopped under a flickering streetlight, shivering. Where would I go? I had no car, no savings, and no one to call. My so-called family had drained my bank account months earlier, convincing me to sign papers I didn't understand. "It's for your future, Mom," Brandon had lied. I believed him, because mothers want to trust their children. Now I was homeless at 45, betrayed by the very people I gave life to. My stomach twisted with hunger, my shoes soaked through, but worst of all was the shame. Every neighbor who once waved at me now stared like I was trash left on the curb. I almost gave up that night. But then, I thought of my late mother. She had lived a quiet life, never speaking much about her past. Still, her final words returned like a whisper in the rain, "You'll find what I left behind." I realized, I had nothing, yet maybe, I wasn't empty after all. The next morning, I woke on a park bench, stiff and sore. My breath fogged in the cold air. As I sat up, my hand brushed something hard in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, an old, yellowed envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. I froze. I had forgotten it was there. She gave it to me days before she passed, telling me softly, "When you're lost, open this." At the time, I didn't understand. Now, I finally ripped it open. Inside was a single key and a folded note. "Samantha, trust only yourself. What they took was never yours to lose. What I've left is hidden where memories sleep." The words shook me. My mother knew betrayal was coming. But how? And what did she mean by memories sleep? Love these stories? Hit subscribe, smash like and tell us where you're watching from. I walked aimlessly until I passed the old library where she once worked. A thought struck me, the archives room, where she spent hours cataloging dusty boxes no one cared about. Clutching the key, I felt something spark inside me. For the first time since my children betrayed me, I wasn't just broken, I had a direction. And maybe, just maybe, I had hope. I pushed open the heavy library doors, their hinges creaking like a warning. The place smelled of old paper and dust, the same scent that clung to my childhood. My mother loved it here. She used to say, "Every secret in the world waits quietly on a shelf." Clutching the key, I headed down to the basement archives. Rows of boxes and metal cabinets lined the walls, untouched for years. My pulse quickened. I searched until I spotted one cabinet tucked in the far corner, its lock rusty and worn. My hands trembled as I slid the key in. It turned with a sharp click. Inside were neatly stacked folders, letters, and one thick leather-bound journal. On the first page, in my mother's graceful script, were the words, "For Samantha, when the world turns against you." Tears blurred my vision. She had planned this. She knew betrayal was coming. I pulled out a sealed envelope tucked inside the journal. On the back was a single instruction: not yet. Only when the time is right. I didn't know what it contained, but my mother had left me a weapon, something powerful enough to change everything. And my family would never see it coming. That night, I sat in a dim corner of the library, the leather-bound journal resting on my lap. My hands shook as I opened it. My mother's handwriting filled every page, her thoughts, her warnings, her plans. She wrote about her fears long before she died. She worried my children would grow greedy, poisoned by money and power. She feared they would forget family, forget me. My chest ached as I read her words. She had seen everything coming. Then, halfway through, I found something that made my breath catch. A list of bank accounts, investments, and property deeds. All hidden under her name, untouched by anyone else. My heart raced. It wasn't small, it was a fortune. But at the bottom of the page was a message that chilled me. This is not for them. It is for you, Samantha. If they betray you, take this and rebuild. But do not act in anger. Act in silence. Let them think they've won. My tears fell onto the page. She had given me more than money. She had given me a plan. And suddenly, I understood, my revenge had already been written. Love these stories? Hit subscribe, smash like and tell us where you're watching from. The next morning, I packed the journal carefully into my bag. My children believed they had stripped me bare, but they had no idea I now carried something worth more than their stolen inheritance. I went straight to the downtown bank listed on one of the journal's pages. My palms sweated as I handed the banker my mother's documents. He examined them, checked his system, then looked up with a startled expression. "Mrs. Scott," he said quietly, "you are the sole beneficiary on these accounts." He slid over a folder with balances that made my stomach lurch. My mother had left me millions. More than enough to survive, more than enough to fight back. But I remembered her warning: do not act in anger. Act in silence. So instead of withdrawing everything, I quietly transferred small amounts into a new account only I controlled. Slowly, carefully, I would move the fortune without raising suspicion. As I walked out of the bank, a strange calm washed over me. My children thought I was powerless, broken, forgotten. But I now held the one thing they could never take back: control. And that was the beginning of my silent revenge. I rented a small apartment on the edge of town, far from the mansion my children had claimed. The walls were bare, the furniture old, but it felt like freedom. I had something they didn't: a secret lifeline. Every evening, I studied my mother's journal like a holy book. It held details of investments, trusted names, even letters from old business partners who still owed her favors. Slowly, I began calling those contacts, pretending I was simply settling her affairs. What surprised me most was how warmly they responded. "Your mother was a wise woman," one man told me. "If she trusted you, so will I." Those words gave me strength. With each quiet move, I was building again: small investments, hidden savings, networks of allies. My children didn't even notice. They were too busy celebrating their supposed victory, parading their new wealth on social media. I watched their posts silently, each smile fueling my resolve. They thought I was gone. They thought I had nothing left. But I was becoming stronger every day. Stronger than they could ever imagine. And when the time was right, I would remind them who they had betrayed. Weeks passed, and I kept building in silence. But one evening, as I scrolled through social media, I noticed something different. My daughter's smile looked strained in her latest photo. My son bragged about their wealth, but behind his words, I sensed desperation. Rumors began to reach me through old acquaintances. The mansion's bills were piling up. The cars, the parties, the endless shopping, it was bleeding them dry. My children had inherited everything, yet still, it wasn't enough. One night, I overheard them in a cafe while passing by. They didn't see me. My son hissed, "We need more money. The accounts are nearly empty." My daughter snapped back, "Mother must have hidden something. She always had secrets." My heart raced, but I kept walking, face turned away. They were starting to suspect. They didn't know what my mother had left, but they could sense it slipping beyond their grasp. And that fear was my first taste of justice. I smiled for the first time in months. Their empire was crumbling, not because I fought them, but because they couldn't handle what they stole. And soon, they would learn who truly held the power. I knew the time had come to make my move, not with anger, but with silence, just as my mother advised. If my children were desperate, I would feed that desperation carefully. From the journal, I found the name of one of my mother's trusted lawyers, Julia Barnes. She was discreet and sharp, someone who knew how to move without leaving a trace. When I met her, she listened to everything quietly before saying, "Your mother prepared for this. We'll protect what's yours, and let them destroy themselves." Together, we crafted a plan. I released a small rumor into the business circle, that a hidden inheritance was still unclaimed. I knew my children would hear it. Sure enough, days later, their social media exploded. They bragged about new opportunities, pretending they had discovered more wealth. But I knew the truth, they were chasing shadows. Meanwhile, Julia helped me secure properties and investments under my name, quietly pulling everything tighter around me. My children still thought they were winning, but in reality, they were chasing bait I had set in motion. It was my first strike. Silent. Invisible. And devastating. The rumor worked faster than I imagined. My children, once united in greed, began to fracture. One afternoon, I spotted them arguing outside the mansion gates. My son's voice rose, sharp and bitter. "You're hiding something from me, aren't you? You've always been selfish." My daughter fired back, "Don't you dare blame me. You're the one who drains every account for your stupid schemes." They didn't notice me across the street, watching silently. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Not of me, but of each other. That night, the whispers spread further. Business partners pulled back, questioning their reliability. Friends who once flocked to their parties stopped answering calls. The cracks widened, and their empire began to sink from the inside. I thought about my mother's words, "Let them think they've won." And indeed, they believed victory was theirs, yet it was rotting in their hands. All I had to do was wait, while they destroyed each other. And as their voices echoed in my mind, filled with anger and blame, I realized something powerful. My revenge had already begun, and they didn't even know it. One cold morning, I walked past the mansion. My heart tightened seeing the rose garden I had planted with my mother years ago. The flowers were overgrown, neglected, just like the love my children once had for me. I remembered something else they had taken, my jewelry box. It wasn't filled with diamonds or gold, but with letters, trinkets, and keepsakes that carried my memories. My mother's locket, my wedding ring, even the seashell necklace my daughter made at age 6. They had locked it away as if it meant nothing. With Julia's help, I filed a quiet legal claim. The box had always been under my name, documented as non-transferable property. Within weeks, a court order forced them to return it. When the jewelry box was placed back into my hands, I felt stronger than ever. It wasn't about wealth, it was about reclaiming myself. That night, I opened the box and found one item I had forgotten, a folded note tucked beneath the locket. It was from my mother, written decades earlier. The words shook me, "If they forget who you are, remind them gently, but never let them erase you." I wouldn't. Not anymore. The court order rattled my children more than I expected. It was just a jewelry box to them, but the loss made them restless, suspicious. They began to wonder what else they might lose. I overheard their argument one evening at a restaurant. My son slammed his fist on the table. "She's not as powerless as we thought. What if she still has more hidden?" My daughter's eyes narrowed. "Don't be ridiculous. She's old, broke, and weak." But, she hesitated, what if you're the one hiding something from me? Their words were knives, cutting into each other instead of me. I stayed in the shadows, silent, watching them tear at their fragile alliance. Meanwhile, Julia guided me through securing more of my mother's assets, this time properties tucked under shell companies no one remembered. Each step stripped away their control, though they had no idea I was behind it. By the time I returned home, I realized something: they weren't fighting me anymore. They were fighting each other. And once trust was gone between them, all I had to do was keep pulling strings. Their greed was the weapon. I was just the hand guiding it. The journal had more than numbers and warnings, it had stories. My mother wrote about treasures hidden where memories sleep and wealth buried in plain sight. To me, they were metaphors, but to my children, they could sound like riddles leading to fortune. With Julia's help, I carefully leaked one page. An innocent-looking copy slipped through a friend we knew would carry gossip straight to them. The page mentioned a mysterious property deed, but no details. It didn't take long. Within days, my daughter posted online about a forgotten inheritance. My son boasted to his friends that they were close to uncovering a secret. But behind their smiles, I knew what was happening. They were chasing a phantom. The beauty of it was that I hadn't lied. The words were real, written by my mother. But without the rest of the journal, they could never understand. Each time they searched, each time they suspected one another, I grew stronger. My mother's voice echoed in my head, let them destroy themselves. And now, the journal wasn't just a guide for me, it was bait for them. A trap they were already stepping into. The rumor about the secret inheritance spread like wildfire. My children were no longer content to argue, they wanted proof. So they did something reckless. Through a contact, I learned my son had hired a private investigator to track down hidden deeds. My daughter, not to be outdone, paid a so-called financial expert to trace old accounts. Neither trusted the other, so they worked in secret, yet both were chasing the same phantom. I watched from the shadows, calm and patient. They were spending fortunes trying to find wealth that would never belong to them. The mansion staff whispered of unpaid salaries. Creditors began knocking on their doors. One evening, I passed by and heard shouting through an open window. My daughter accused my son of stealing leads. He threw back, maybe you're the one meeting with mother behind my back. Their paranoia was eating them alive. Meanwhile, Julia and I tightened control over the real assets. Each signature, each transfer, made me safer while they crumbled further. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was balance. For the first time in years, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Power was tilting back into my hands. By now, my children were bleeding money, chasing shadows I had dangled in front of them. But I was ready to deliver the next blow. Julia discovered that part of my late mother's fortune had quietly funded several businesses, cafes, shops, even rental homes, all tied to shell companies still in my mother's name. My children had no idea these streams existed. They thought they controlled everything. With a few legal documents, we redirected the profits into my private account. It was subtle, invisible, yet devastating. Within weeks, their monthly income dropped. The bills for the mansion, the cars, the endless luxuries, they no longer had enough to cover them. And still, they suspected each other, not me. I overheard my daughter scream, "You're draining the accounts," while my son shouted back, "Don't lie, you're hiding something from me." Their empire was collapsing piece by piece, but they couldn't see the hand pulling the strings. I walked away from the bank that day with a quiet smile. My mother's words echoed, "Do not act in anger. Act in silence." And in silence, I was cutting away everything they had stolen, leaving them with nothing. Their downfall, once private, began spilling into the open. Creditors showed up at the mansion gates, demanding overdue payments. The once loyal staff whispered about unpaid wages, then quietly quit. At a charity gala, my daughter arrived in a dress she had clearly borrowed. When a guest asked about her designer, she laughed nervously and changed the subject. My son, who once bragged about his cars, had quietly sold 2 of them. People noticed. Whispers spread. Are they really as wealthy as they claim? I stood in the back of the gala, unseen, watching their smiles falter under polite but sharp questions. For the first time, they looked small, like children pretending to be royalty. Meanwhile, Julia and I secured more assets, moving them into safe hands. I didn't need to announce my victories. The world was doing it for me. My mother's warning returned to me: wealth shows its truth when pride is stripped away. And now, stripped of pride, my children stood exposed. Their masks were slipping. Their empire was cracking. And I was only just beginning. For months I lived in silence, watching my children unravel. But now, with my footing secure, it was time to return, not loudly, but carefully. I accepted an invitation to a small community event at the library, the same place where I had discovered my mother's journal. When I walked in, heads turned. Neighbors who thought I had vanished greeted me warmly. "Samantha, we've missed you," they said. Their kindness felt like sunlight after a long winter. My children weren't there, of course. They had stopped attending such gatherings, too embarrassed to face questions. Their absence only made the whispers louder. People compared their arrogance with my quiet return. After the event, an old friend pulled me aside. "Everyone sees the truth now. They're not what they pretend to be. But your strength is showing." Her words filled me with calm pride. My mother had been right. Revenge wasn't about shouting or fighting. It was about patience, silence, and timing. As I walked home under the evening sky, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rising. And soon, the world, and my children, would see me as I truly was. It happened faster than I expected. One morning, news spread across town: the mansion had been served with foreclosure notices. Photographers swarmed the gates, snapping pictures as my children shouted at officers and tried to push reporters away. My son's voice cracked in anger. "This is a mistake. We'll fix it." My daughter, pale and trembling, muttered excuses about temporary setbacks. But the damage was done. Their downfall was no longer a whisper, it was on full display. I watched from a cafe nearby, sipping tea as the scene unfolded on live television. Customers murmured, some laughing softly, others shaking their heads. They thought they were untouchable, one woman whispered. That night, social media was merciless. Friends who once praised my children now mocked them. The same people who had filled their parties now turned away. Julia called me with calm satisfaction. "The world is seeing them for what they are, reckless and greedy. You don't need to lift a finger. They're unraveling themselves." And she was right. For the first time, I felt no sadness watching them fall. Only justice. The empire they stole was crumbling brick by brick, while I stood steady in silence. Their empire had collapsed to ruins, but I knew my work wasn't finished. My children still believed I was weak, a ghost clinging to scraps. They needed to see the truth, not in anger, but in undeniable proof. Julia and I met late into the night, papers spread across her desk. We organized deeds, accounts, and letters of ownership my mother had left. With each document, the picture grew clearer. I wasn't just surviving. I was wealthier, stronger, and more secure than they had ever been. "The timing matters," Julia reminded me. "If you reveal this too soon, they'll claw back with excuses. Wait until they're desperate, when the world already knows their downfall." She was right. Patience had brought me this far. I could wait a little longer. In the meantime, I began making quiet moves in the community, donating anonymously, supporting causes my mother once cherished. Whispers started: "Samantha Scott is back. She hasn't disappeared after all." The stage was setting itself. My children had reached the bottom. And when the time was right, I would not only reveal my strength. I would remind them whose blood they had betrayed. It was late evening when I heard the knock. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, but when I opened the door, my breath caught. My son stood there, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. Behind him, my daughter clutched her coat tightly, shivering in the night air. They looked nothing like the proud heirs who had stolen everything from me. They looked broken. "Mother," my son began, his voice cracking, we need your help." My daughter, eyes red from crying, added, "They've taken the mansion. The accounts are empty. We don't know where else to turn." I said nothing at first, letting the silence stretch between us. Their desperation hung heavy in the air. Finally, I spoke softly. "When you betrayed me, you thought I had nothing left. You forgot one thing: strength doesn't come from money. It comes from truth." They looked confused, frightened, almost ashamed. I didn't invite them in. Not yet. They needed to feel the weight of their choices a little longer. Because soon, they would learn the full truth. And it would break them more than poverty ever could. I let them stand outside, trembling in their pride and shame, before finally opening the door wider. "Come in," I said, my voice calm but firm. They shuffled inside like strangers in my home. We sat at the table, the same table where we once shared family dinners before greed poisoned everything. My daughter stared at the floor. My son rubbed his temples like he carried the weight of the world. "You think you've lost everything," I began, "but what you really lost was yourselves." They looked up, startled, as I pulled out a worn leather box from the cabinet. Inside were documents, letters, and deeds, my mother's secret legacy. "This," I said, sliding the papers across the table, "is what I protected while you were busy destroying me." Their mouths fell open. Bank shares. Land deeds. Investments older than both of them. "You betrayed me for scraps," I continued. "All while the true fortune rested here, in the hands of someone who knew the value of patience." My son swallowed hard. My daughter gasped. For the first time, they realized I was no victim. I had been the keeper of power all along. The silence at the table was heavy. My children shifted uncomfortably as their eyes stayed fixed on the documents. "You don't deserve to see this," I said firmly. "But I need you to understand what betrayal costs." My son leaned forward, desperate. "Mom, we were wrong. We didn't know." I raised my hand. "Stop. You knew enough when you turned your backs on me. You knew when you called me a burden. You knew when you celebrated my downfall." My daughter whispered, "What do you want from us?" I locked eyes with her. "I don't want your apologies. I want respect. I want honesty. And I want you to work for redemption." They exchanged uneasy glances. "You will rebuild your lives without stealing, without lies. And if you want even a fraction of this legacy, you will prove you can be trusted again. That means years of accountability, not days." My son's face flushed. "Years?" "Yes," I said coldly. "Because trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy." They had no argument. The truth pressed down on them like a weight. For once, the power was entirely in my hands. I leaned back, studying their nervous faces. "If you want a future in this family, you'll prove it." My daughter asked, "How?" I slid another envelope across the table. Inside were instructions I had written the night before. "This is the test. You will work under Rosa at the community center. No shortcuts. No arrogance. You'll serve the people you once looked down on." My son frowned. "That's beneath us." "Exactly," I said sharply. "And that's why you'll do it. You must learn humility before you ever touch this inheritance." They exchanged uneasy glances. I saw their pride crack. "This isn't punishment," I continued. "It's redemption. You will spend 1 year serving others, reporting directly to Rosa. Fail, and you'll lose everything. Succeed, and you'll prove you're worthy of carrying this family forward." My daughter whispered, "And if we refuse?" I gave a thin smile. "Then the inheritance passes to people who understand sacrifice, those who've stood by me." The message was clear. For the first time, my children realized the empire wasn't theirs by birthright. It would only be theirs if they earned it. Their silence was my victory. Weeks passed, and I kept my distance. Rosa gave me updates, each report painting a picture of my children's struggle. At first, they resisted. My son dragged his feet, avoiding work, while my daughter complained about every task. But the community center wasn't forgiving. They scrubbed floors, sorted donations, and listened to stories from people who had lost far more than they ever would. Slowly, something shifted. My daughter began helping an elderly woman with groceries, while my son started teaching kids basic computer skills. Rosa noted their change, though she reminded me, it's early. Don't be fooled too soon. I nodded. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for growth. From afar, I watched them bend, break, and begin again. Their arrogance peeled away like old paint, revealing something raw beneath. At night, I asked myself, were they truly changing, or only playing a role to secure the inheritance? The answer would come in time. For now, I remained silent, holding the power close. The future was no longer theirs to demand, it was mine to decide. 1 year later, I called everyone together. The air was heavy with expectation as my children sat before me, older and quieter than before. I've watched you, I began. I've listened to Rosa's reports. You stumbled, you resisted, but in time, you began to understand. My son lowered his head. Mom, I was blind. I thought money defined me. I was wrong. My daughter's voice shook. I mocked you, but serving others taught me humility. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope for it. For the first time, I believed their words carried truth. I opened the final envelope. The inheritance remains in this family, but not as your prize. It will fund scholarships, shelters, and rebuilding lives. You will manage it, but under Rosa's guidance. Step out of line, and it vanishes. Their eyes widened, not with greed, but with responsibility. I leaned forward. This legacy isn't about wealth. It's about honor. Betray me again, and it ends. Silence followed. Then, my children nodded, tears in their eyes. For the first time in years, I felt my mother's strength flow through me. I wasn't broken. I was unshakable. And the power was mine. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more powerful narratives, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what part hit you the hardest. Thanks for watching.